Good morning, everyone. I'm Ernesto Burden, the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our New Hampshire Business Review webinar today, Where the Pipes Are, Keys to Unlocking More Housing and Better Planning. Today, we're going to discover how new statewide water and sewer data in the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas can transform housing and planning in New Hampshire. Our webinar today is sponsored by St. Anselm's Initiative for Housing Policy and Practice. And on that note, we will get underway with an introduction to our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alyssa Margolin, and I serve as Director of the Initiative for Housing Policy and Practice at St. Anselm College. Thank you to all of the attendees for joining us this morning for an important milestone for those of us who are really invested in understanding how to address the housing crisis, how to make efficient use of infrastructure, and how to have better planning in New Hampshire. So we're really looking forward to this morning's webinar. This is indeed a milestone. We will be exploring all that the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas can tell us to date, and we look forward to doing that with presenters. First, we'll hear from Sarah Reitzman, the Manager of Community Engagement and Education at New Hampshire Housing, and Rick Lederer-Barnes from Upstate GIS. And then we will, I'll moderate a panel with Preston Hunter from ProCon, Heather Schenk from New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs, and Nick Taylor from Housing Action New Hampshire. With that, I will turn it over to Sarah Reitzman.
Hi, Sarah. Just a quick note from the producer, you're muted.
Oops, sorry about that. I remember to turn my camera on, but not my microphone. So hi, everyone. Sarah Reitzman. I'm going to start by introducing the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Atlas is both an interactive map and a comprehensive database and allows you to view district-level land use regulations that affect housing development across the state all in one place. It's the product of a statewide effort, but it's modeled after and includes guidance from the National Zoning Atlas Project. The idea was originally created by Sarah Bronin, who at the time was the executive director of Desegregate Connecticut. Connecticut's zoning atlas was launched in 2021, and the idea spread from here. We had Sarah, the St. Anselm College, at the time, the Housing We Need program had Sarah Bronin come and speak at our December Housing We Need roundtable, and Max was very excited about this idea, and that's where it started for us. So New Hampshire was one of the early adopters. But we're in pretty good company today with about half the country's zoning districts on the Atlas. It's like 24 states. Using the Atlas, you can view districts where residential versus non-residential is allowed. Costa, will you go to the next slide, please? There we go. I think even the next one. There we go. All right, so using the Atlas, you can view districts where residential versus non-residential is allowed. You can view where single-family development all the way up to 5+ multifamily is allowed, as well as filter for affordable housing, for manufactured housing, for accessory dwelling units, and all kinds of other filters. The Atlas includes dimensional regulations, which includes minimum lot sizes, setback requirements, lot coverage, height restrictions, parking requirements, things like that. And now, brand new, the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas shows public water and sewer lines. As far as I know, this is the first zoning atlas in the country to include water and sewer data. Slide, please. The Atlas is policy neutral, but it makes community zoning regulations and water sewer lines visible and comparable across the state. So you're really able to make like apples to apples comparisons. This strengthens the ability of residents, planners, developers, community leaders to identify current zoning and infrastructure limitations that may be constraining New Hampshire's housing supply. This is incredibly important for municipalities when planning for growth and striking a balance between housing development and land conservation, because we know that that's a big goal here in New Hampshire, especially among our rural communities. But in all of our communities, they want to strike that right balance. And we, of course, want to make the best use of existing infrastructure. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of like a preview of what the various maps looked like. So an astronomical amount of labor went into the data collection to make this project possible, specifically the water sewer update. So I was the least involved of the leadership team, making me the best person to brag on their behalf of all of the work that they did. So in 2023, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, DES, did a comprehensive update of all the water lines and community water systems, which did give us a good starting place. We received a list of 134 systems that we needed to then sort into municipalities. In some municipalities, there's more than one system, of course, and there are systems that serve more than one municipality. So we had to organize that data and figure out a good way to do that. So we reached out to all 134 sewer operators across the state. There was a lot of manual work needed to even identify who the correct person was, either with the sewer utility or sewer commission, who had access to the map. So the team who did this work has a lot of great stories. For example, there was a precinct where we had to go there and borrow a physical copy of the large original paper map from the 1970s of the system. So then it was on Rick to figure out how to digitize all of this. So for some of our communities, the intern team had to follow up with the sewer operator more than a half dozen times before we received a map, and there were communities that were concerned about a security risk. Next slide. More broadly, the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas includes data from over 23,000 pages of zoning, subdivision, and site plan ordinances from 269 jurisdictions. So that includes 250 cities and towns with zoning, 10 village districts or sub-municipal districts with independent zoning, 23 unincorporated places that are zoned by Coas County, 19 towns without zoning, and then there are 2 unincorporated places without zoning. We update this data every year to reflect the changes that are made at town meeting or by governing bodies during the year. I'm going to leave it here for now, and I'm going to turn it over to Rick Lederer-Barnes, who is going to demonstrate how to use the Atlas. Rick, they are all yours.
Thanks, Sarah. So the Atlas is hosted on a website, nhzoningatlas.org. And if you click on that, you will see this. And you'll see a little introduction about the Atlas. You'll see our key findings that we've found throughout the years we've been doing this. Visual summary of the Atlas that walks through the findings and also a lot of the methodology that went into the Atlas. The interactive Atlas itself, of course, which I'll come back to. The data sets that Sarah was talking about, and you can actually download those data and use that within your own applications. There's a tutorial on how to use the Atlas, which I highly recommend you look at if you've never used the Atlas before. And then the Atlas itself. So when you click on that link, it'll bring you to a welcome screen that'll explain what the Atlas is. You can click OK. It'll bring you to some more intro text that walks you through some of the functionality of the Atlas, again, the data that's within it, as well as how to interact with the Atlas, and then finally some more information, including a link to that visual summary. So when you come to the Atlas, which hopefully a lot of you have seen it previously, on the left we have filters and toggles, so you can search by different things. Along the top are a search bar for jurisdictions, and also you can search by address in the upper right. And then on the far right is a legend, which is now interactive, so you can turn layers on and off. So for instance, we turn the water and sewer off. We can see the underlying districts a little easier. We can use these toggles on the left. So for instance, we can look where duplexes are allowed statewide. We can also look at, let's say, 5+ family statewide and see where that's allowed. There's other toggles, as you see below that. We can look at where districts currently are zoned for detached ADUs. And then, of course, the most recent addition is the variable regulations based on water and sewer. So these are districts that have different regulations based on whether there's water, sewer, or neither or both. Below that, we have toggles for age and income restrictions. It looks like the demo froze, Ernesto. I don't know if you... There it goes. Okay. And then below that, we have manufactured housing toggles. We can look at where you can have a manufactured home on a lot or in a park, both, neither. And then finally, we have a series of filters that you can use. So if you want to look at, say, where can you build a single family home on an acre or less in New Hampshire, we can look at that, and the map will update and show you all the areas where you can have a single family home on a small lot. Or we could say, well, where are there districts that require a large lot, say 10 acres or more, and we can do a similar filtering for that. Then, if we're interested in density for multifamily, we can go to the 5+ family density selection. Where can we see where we can have 4 units per acre or more? Or maybe even we want to look for 10 units per acre or more. And they have the ability to filter that. And so, at the statewide scale, some of that, density information might be a little hard to see. So we can also zoom into an individual municipality. So we'll zoom into Rochester here using our search function. If we turn on the water and sewer layers again, we can see where those water and sewer lines are in Rochester. If we click on the municipality, we get a breakdown of how the overall municipality is zoned, residential, mixed use, commercial, and non-developable area. For the residential, we can see a breakdown of the types, 1 family through 5+ family. And then you also have links to the zoning code and subdivision regulations where they exist. So if we look at where districts vary, allowed lot size by water and sewer, we'll turn that back on. We'll click on this area where we can see there is no water and sewer. We see it's the agricultural district. 1 and 2 family is allowed. 3, 4, 5+ is prohibited. And then if we zoom down a little bit, we see the minimum lot size for a single family development is just over an acre, but under ideal conditions, it would be just under half an acre. So if we click, let's say, where there's water available, we'll see if we scroll back down, we see now that has the minimum lot size is updated. Now it says 0.69 acres is required. And again, just a little bit bigger than the quote unquote ideal case. And then where there is water and sewer, we click on that. And we see now that the minimum lot size of just under half an acre matches that ideal lot size. And you can see there are some areas that don't have variable regulations based on water and sewer, but we do have water and sewer present. And if we click on one of those areas, we see the minimum lot size there is actually already just under a quarter of an acre. So presumably the whole district is zoned based on knowing there's water and sewer present, and that's why it doesn't have variable density. And then one thing that we added recently as part of this update is a mobile-friendly version of the Atlas. Previously, trying to access the Atlas on on your cell phone was frustrating at best and impossible at worst. So we've created a mobile-friendly version. We still recommend you use the desktop version if possible, because it's a lot easier to use and a lot easier to see. But in the mobile version, it works similarly. You'll have that intro screen. You've got the map at the top, interactive legend in the middle, and then filters are now on the bottom. And each of those colored circles represents one of those groupings that you saw on the left side of the desktop version. And the filters work the same way. You can turn them on and off. You can look for different lot sizes, densities, things like that. And then, of course, if you click on the map, you'll get that same pop-up information. So it's a quick and easy way to view the Atlas on your phone if you're out in the field or at a meeting and don't have access to the desktop version. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alyssa.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Sarah. Attendees, I am going to walk through some high-level findings on what the updated New Hampshire Zoning Atlas is telling us. And then we will have a discussion with our esteemed panel. And then we're going to open it up to Q&A with all of the presenters today. So as you start to think of your questions, you can start to write them in that Q&A box. And we can start to look through those questions so that we have a good, robust discussion on the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas's water sewer layer. So let me tell you, the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas, as Sarah mentioned, its history, launched in 2023 with its first catalog and statewide map of all of New Hampshire zoning regulations. And we learned then that our local regulations are making it difficult for us to deal with the production issues for market to meet the demand for more affordable homes. Um, we also learned that large lot requirements are mostly not related to water sewer needs, and that these large lot requirements are driving up home costs for Granite Staters. In addition, the detail that Rick just described, that housing type restrictions are also making it difficult for that starter home for families looking to get into home ownership with something affordable. And also, where we don't have water, sewer, missing middle housing or infill in places where we do, restrictions on missing middle housing types is making it those regulations is making are blocking opportunities to address more affordable opportunities through missing middle. But wherever there are challenges, there are always opportunities, and we know that many communities and the state legislature have been looking at opportunities to adjust zoning to make better use of the limited public water sewer infrastructure that we have in the state. Next slide, please. Indeed, the new water sewer data layer shows us how limited that infrastructure really is. Only 12% of the buildable area in New Hampshire has access to water or sewer. Only 5.6% of buildable area has both. But the opportunity here is to think about efficiency, and that lot size could be that key to making more efficient use of the infrastructure that we do have. Again, as I mentioned in the prior slide, missing middle is also an important solution for most of New Hampshire communities, looking at building different types of housing that create that affordability and make more efficient use of septic and current infrastructure. There's also a conversation that we should start to have around new technology for what is an old problem here in New Hampshire. There is a lot of innovation happening around the country with new alternative septic technology. And we could collectively be spending more time bringing that new technology to New Hampshire. There's also community septic solutions and providing capacity and grant funding and supporting those who are looking for community septic solutions. And finally, and this is the most expensive conversation or finding, and but it needs to be said that investments in water sewer infrastructure could go a long way in New Hampshire to allowing us to find more buildable area and more density. And with that, we can go to our panel discussion. And also I'll ask my panelists, Preston Hunter from ProCon, Heather Schenk from New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs, and Nick Taylor from Housing Action New Hampshire to join me on the webinar. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Preston, I'm going to start with you. Why do developers and construction companies care about this new statewide view into New Hampshire's water sewer infrastructure?
Well, it's hard to believe that everyone doesn't care about sewer and water, but developers especially care about it. I think I see that we have a number of developers on the call today and other commercial real estate brokers. I think many of you know that access to sewer and water is often one of the first questions that's asked when looking at a potential development site. And right now, I think that it's more important than ever. Site selection is one of the few things that we can control from a cost perspective. So I think we're all well aware of the rising costs of construction, both materials and labor, but choosing the right site can really make a difference in the financial feasibility of a project or not. And really, it comes down to density. Density is one of the best tools to make housing more affordable. And when we talk about density, we're talking about how many units can you put on an acre. And there's really two major determining factors there. One is zoning, and the other is the availability of sewer and water. Parking, I would also add as a third important factor there. So, zoning has been a hot topic, looking at the ability to add more density, but you really can't do that without the availability of the sewer and water. Wells and septic systems just really can't provide the kind of density needed to develop affordable housing, and in many cases, even market rate housing at scale. And so really, we're forced to look to sites that are serviced by public sewer and water.
Thanks, Preston. Heather, over to you. So you direct the Division of Planning and Community Development at our Department of Business and Economic Affairs. So you're thinking about economic development more broadly. So how do you envision the Granite State getting the most out of our new zoning atlas data? If you could just unmute, please, Heather. Thank you.
That's really easy to forget. On a macro level, I think it's helpful for everyone to see how much water and sewer infrastructure there actually is, whether it's elected officials or municipal officials, developers, members of the public. The information can give us a better grasp of how much and where housing can actually be supported without more serious investment in infrastructure. So single family housing on large lots, they can go almost anywhere where there aren't environmental constraints, but with or without sewer. But those are likely, as Preston said, to be really expensive due to construction costs. Now, we do need housing of all types, but when it comes to what we're really trying to create more of as affordable housing, that's going to be, smaller houses on small lots, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and of course, in cases where they can be supported multifamily developments. So it can help us understand more globally what types of investments might be needed and might be supported, especially for communities that clearly want more housing, but they're constrained by the lack of infrastructure. So yeah, just on that bigger scale, it can help everybody to really understand what's going on in the state and what can be supported. And it's just as valuable for local municipal officials and the public at the local level. It can help them understand what types of housing they can support, at least with water and sewer, and where that should go. And if and where they can support multifamily. Some communities may not be able to support multifamily at all, and their density is simply duplexes where they might have commercial development, or smaller lots where they have water sewer infrastructure. So it can be helpful for them for master planning, for all communities for master planning. It's really the first step in determining where you should have housing, where you should have recreation, where you should try to conserve areas, and where infrastructure could be or should be extended. So really a basic best practice of planning is to build where you have infrastructure, where it's already been disturbed, where it needs to be redeveloped, because not just water and sewer, but there may be other infrastructure amenities there as well. Like the roads in those areas may have the greatest capacity or the appropriate capacity. There may be sidewalks, there may be recreation areas. So, New Hampshire has a wide variety of many different types of communities of different densities. So that's going to be different for every community, but there are many communities that do have those amenities. And those are maybe the areas that should be focused on. So you're not going to extend water sewer out in the middle of a rural road in the middle of nowhere. It's not necessarily going to be the best bang for your buck. So also smaller communities with limited resources, they might benefit from sharing So you can look at your neighbor's water sewer and be like, oh, look, they've got this all over here. Maybe we can get together or make a mutual investment and support each other with extending water sewer infrastructure. So those are some ways from the global to the local level about how having everyone available to see this information can be valuable.
Thanks, Heather. Nick, over to you. So, as a housing advocate, what narrative will you now share with legislators when advocating for pro-housing policies? And how does the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas inform that advocacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alyssa. I mean, I'm incredibly excited for this data layer and for this conversation to move forward. I'm so glad that so many others are also very excited about water and sewer infrastructure and joining today. I mean, good data makes good policy decisions, and you can't really have good policy decisions, as Heather said, at the local, state, or federal level if you don't really understand what some of the implications are on the ground. And so we often talk in New Hampshire about some of the infrastructure limitations, but we haven't had that clear data to visualize that and help make that accessible to policymakers. So a few things that had jumped out at me is seeing that only 12% of New Hampshire's buildable land has access to water or sewer infrastructure, and only about 6%, 5.5% have access to both. And so we have to make really smart decisions about where there's infrastructure and where there's not, and what does that mean for some of these policy decisions. I think, as you mentioned, we have to have some sort of conversations about our existing infrastructure, expanding it, as well as looking at the existing capacity within that 12% that we already have. Where is their capacity and what upgrades are needed there? But we also have to think about what are some of these housing options for places that don't. We can't write off 94% of the state that doesn't have access to water and sewer infrastructure, because those areas still need teachers, they still need firefighters, police officers, folks in the retail spaces. They still need affordable homes in their communities. And so we have to be thinking about, how do we look at this data? How do we factor in the fact that there are some limited options, but know that we have to be working to solutions? And some of that, as Preston and Heather both mentioned, looks like lot sizes, looks like looking at sort of science-based standards and figuring out where things make sense, looking at density or height where there is infrastructure so that we are making the most of those efficient resources. And that's a win-win for communities and folks who are looking for more affordable housing, because you're having more folks who are on the existing infrastructure and making sort of your tax revenue go further. And we know these are expensive systems as well. So, we know that the people of New Hampshire are asking for more housing options. They're asking for more affordable housing options. And I think this will really help local and state policymakers make smart decisions based on the data that we have.
Thank you, Nick. Preston, back to you. I was communicating with a developer, an affordable housing developer in New Hampshire, and we were talking about what the Atlas offers from that perspective, but that it's not a replacement for due diligence. I mean, when understanding your parcel and what the capacity issues are in a community still needs to happen. But I wanted to know how you might use this tool and how do you see developers using it and prioritizing, where they're going to invest their time and resources to meet market demand.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's really kind of a first of its kind, like was mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure that this tool exists in any other states right now. And it allows us to have a picture of those areas that are both zoned appropriately for higher density housing and have access to sewer and water without having to go town by town, GIS map to GIS map. So it creates this one-stop shop to a certain extent that allows developers to focus on communities that have those two important ingredients. As you said, it's not doesn't necessarily replace the due diligence that's needed. But in many cases, as Rick mentioned, this sewer and water data wasn't even available online. He was going to building departments and digitizing paper maps. So the ability to have a place to go to just identify areas that meet those criteria, and sort of combining that with, knowledge of the market and rents and demand and so forth, I think, really will help developers focus on the areas that have the highest likelihood of working out for multifamily housing. And when those areas are identified, really then it's on them to go to the municipality's GIS plans to really understand what is available. But in many cases, that data is not even complete either. So, often developers may sort of submit an offer, get an LOI in place to purchase a property, and then they start their due diligence period. And that's really when they want to be meeting with this town or municipality's building department, the public works department, the planning department, to make sure that the information they have is accurate. One of the things that the zoning atlas doesn't do is really address capacity of existing systems. And certainly when you're looking at a large scale development, understanding the capacity of the existing sewer and water systems is important part of your due diligence as well.
Thanks. And Heather, I'm going to get back to you. You raised how this could be a tool for better planning. And I know that one of the goals of the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas Leadership Team is to not only get this data in the hands of our professional planners and our municipal planners, but also to community members who are active working with their local planners to update master plans and to have a vision for how they're going to meet local needs. So what is your advice to our New Hampshire planning community on how to integrate this water and sewer data into their work with communities?
Sure. Well, just start with a fun fact, which is the statutes only require 2 sections in the master plan. They allow quite a few, but they only require 2. And one's the vision and one's the land use section. So this information is really critical to that land use section. It's helping people to understand, where they should be conserving, where they should be having housing, where they could, what makes sense based on previous investments, and where is the recreation space, where are the recreation spaces. So it really helps to understand, like, you look at the infrastructure and you look at the natural resources and what you need to preserve or save, or where you need to focus development. And so just for that very basic step, most communities hopefully already have that information. I had the benefit of working in a large city with many resources, and everyone knows where the water and sewer infrastructure, or at least it's there. You can see it very clearly. But in smaller communities, I'm not so sure that everyone really understands where those resources are. So seeing the map can help them understand. You basically do a needs assessment, an inventory of your community when you're doing a master plan. You're looking at, where's the housing, where are the resources, where are the roads. And when you look at the infrastructure in relation to all those other things, some clear patterns start to emerge about where you can support density and where that can be. So that really is helpful, I think, for communities. And they can also see, like, if you've got water sewer and then you've got like 5 acres zoning, that's not really maximizing, the investment that you've made. I mean, infrastructure is expensive. So it's helpful to try to put some density or alter your zoning in those areas to provide more tax base to support the infrastructure that's there, right? And so that, I think, might speak to a little bit of one of the questions that was in the chat is, expecting those areas to start generating more taxes where the infrastructure makes a lot of sense for all of your infrastructure. It can also help with understanding where your capital investments should be made. If you see where the infrastructure is, well, it makes sense right there to put a capital, some type of extension of infrastructure based on where it already is. Things start to click together in very logical ways when you look at these big picture issues. And it's helpful for the public too, when they start to try to understand, instead of, oh, I don't want that down there, it's right down the street from my house. You look at this bigger picture and you realize, oh, that's really the only place it can go, and we need it. So now I understand why they're proposing what they are down the street from my house.
If I could follow up on that, Heather, because I've seen a narrative showing up about the value of the economic value and the municipal revenue value of allowing for more density to address some critical infrastructure needs at the community level. That is counter to an older narrative that a growing community is costly.
Yeah.
Can you help us wrestle with those two narratives?
Well, I think we'll continue to have that conversation. Every community is different, of course, but we actually, this is unplanned plug for the fiscal housing calculator that we had some consultants develop at BEA that looks at what's the increased costs and taxes for different housing types. And what we found after testing it quite a bunch with a lot of different communities all across New Hampshire is that whether you do a single family versus a duplex, the change in the cost, according to this model, is not that great. It's not that much. In other words, it's very small. And I think it's common knowledge, I would say, in the planning world that building more housing brings more people, grows your tax base. We know that single family housing is the most expensive for a community. Multifamily generates a lot more revenue for the community and can pay for itself. So in some ways, it's almost the sort of solution is almost opposite of what people typically think. They say, oh no, we don't want any more multifamily. The multifamily is what's going to pay your bills. That's as a community. The higher density is what's going to generate you more income. Spreading single family out into your rural areas is what's costly. Now you've got more area for your police to patrol, more distance your fire trucks have to go. So it's putting density in smaller areas is really the answer from a fiscal perspective for a community, especially in New Hampshire with how we're losing kids. I mean, schools are closing, like the enrollment is going down, and I don't think we want to become, our demographics just shifting so dramatically in that direction. Like we need young people, we need kids, we need to support our communities and support the state. So there's a lot of sort of myths out there, I think, that things can't be afforded, but this is especially where having planners. I'm going to also put a plug in for the RPCs. Like now more than ever, we need the assistance of the regional planning agencies. They have the expertise. The communities should be reaching out to their RPCs and helping them to understand how to address some of these issues and look more closely at their community. Because like I said, every community is going to be different. Something that works in one place might not be the right answer for another place, depending on how much infrastructure is there. So I think, sorry, I just said a lot, but in conclusion, density in the right place is what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck from a fiscal perspective for a community. Whereas sprawling or trying not to grow at all is like a recipe for I was gonna say recipe for death. Halloween's coming up, I can say that.
Well, you've certainly made clear the point. It's definitely an expensive way to plan community. And I think when we bring the full panel out, we can talk a little bit more about the opportunity here to identify where are good places for conservation, land conservation, and recreation, and historic preservation, and keeping these beautiful communities that we love. But before I do want to ask Nick about policy implications here. I think we're opening up a conversation about infrastructure here, with this first statewide picture of the limited infrastructure that we do have in the state. And so, yeah, I wonder what you think the biggest policy implications are.
Yeah, I think that starting that conversation is exactly right. Over the last few years, especially at both the state and local level, we've seen, a real shift from folks who are sort of asking, should we do something, to, okay, we agree we need to do something, what should we do? And so that is a different conversation, right? Like that's, now you're making sort of policy decisions and trying to understand the potential impacts of what those decisions are. And so we've seen some proposals at the state level that have different standards based on whether infrastructure is present. And those conversations, I think, are important because, you're, to Heather's point, thinking about where would the density best fit and where would these more affordable and attainable housing options be most appropriate. There are some other states around the country and around the region that have sort of growth zones and certain areas where they're making some of these sort of broader decisions about where they would like to see growth. And New Hampshire doesn't really have that at a state level. And so oftentimes the infrastructure conversation is a little bit of a proxy for where development would make sense. And so we saw this show up in bills around duplexes and middle housing. We've seen this show up around lot size bills and lot size conversations. We've also seen those very same conversations come up locally with the idea of variable density, depending on whether there is access to infrastructure within an existing zone. And so, when you're having these conversations, you need to have the data. And so this will have, be instrumental in actually understanding community by community what the impact is. And oftentimes when we're talking with policymakers, they'll say, what is the impact on my community? And the ability to have a really strong data-driven answer for that folks can see and really understand. And then you're weighing the policy trade-offs and making the best decision you can. But that's incredibly important. And then I do think, your point there around, you're talking about open space and conservation, and the conservation and affordability both share the common enemy of sprawl. Like sprawl is bad for conservation, it's incredibly bad for affordability. And so being able to make some of these decisions smarter and more appropriate for our state is really important. And then finally, I do think driving that infrastructure conversation forward. I've seen a couple things in the chat too about, well, how do you pay for this? What kind of policy decisions are you making based off this information? And I think starting that conversation is important because, we'll be coming up on a second year budget. We also have, as a Dillon's rural state, the communities can only do what the state empowers them to do. And so if there's enabling legislation that would be important to help communities better fund things themselves, pairing that with potential federal investments, there's a lot of missing pieces that still need to come together to make this happen. But it only starts when you can understand the problem and can have agreement that you need to address it.
Great. Well, with that, I'd like to invite Sarah Reitzman and Rick Letter-Barnes back to the panel and start to dig into some of the questions provided by our attendees. And I see that there are some in the Q&A box and some in the chat, so I'll jump back and forth. And I don't know that we'll get to all of them, but this is just the start of a conversation about how the new water sewer data can be valuable to all of you in the community. And so we invite you to continue the conversation with us at the Initiative for Housing Policy and Practice and with our partners who are joining us today. So let me start. A lot of people are asking about the cost issue. So I just want to make sure that we address it as a panel. I mean, I've heard, I don't know if this is a myth, but I've heard that extending water and sewer is either $1 million a mile. I've heard some people say $2 million a mile. It sounds like the feasibility of it, particularly during these times, seems out of reach at times. But I'd like to open it up to the panel, see if anyone wants to address solutions to the current situation where, the 12% of buildable area and how developers who have a drive to meet this market demand might approach that. So let me maybe start with you, Preston.
Sure. Yeah, so there isn't no easy answer to how much it costs to extend sewer and water. There are a lot of different factors that go into it, but it is millions of dollars. In New Hampshire, of course, we're the granite state, and that means that there's often ledge encountered, which is very expensive to blast and remove for these underground pipes. The other challenges with extending sewer and water include, well, capacity of existing lines, right? So imagine the end of a sewer line. Is it really sized to add more flow to it? Probably not. Is it deep enough so that you can gravity feed for miles in advance? Probably not. So now in those situations, you may be looking at actually building pumping stations in order to lift the effluents into existing gravity systems. And similarly on the water side, pumping stations may be required in order to maintain pressures, and then of course you have to make sure that you have enough supply in order to meet those additional loads. So it's a complicated question. It's very dependent on the existing system that you're adding on to. And it's a big reason why there isn't a lot of sewer and water projects going on around the state.
And so we have a number of comments and questions from the developer community today asking about how to address communities that are deliberately not investing in their current infrastructure to kind of keep density out. And have you seen communities that have embraced a different philosophy that have good outcomes? Preston, that's a follow-up for you.
Okay, that one's for me.
Yeah.
I think the best outcome is that there is a lot more awareness, right? And I think one of the other panelists said, now the conversation is changing, not to should we do something or not. It's how do we do something and what should we do first. I think some municipalities are embracing that through changes of zoning. And we're starting to see cities like Manchester, for example, that are rolling out, new zoning ordinance, a new master plan for the city that really creates a lot more flexibility around housing. I think affordability of housing is a topic on everyone's mind. And at the end of the day, it's an economic issue. And New Hampshire Housing recently released a terrific report, and I know Sarah was very involved with that. And it's titled "Who Can Afford to Live in New Hampshire?" And it really is a quick read, but has some staggering numbers. And the long and the short is only 15% of the people that live in New Hampshire can't afford the median cost of a new home. And that means that they're renting. Most of the people that are looking for homes are renting. And that's a big reason why a lot of the rent costs have gone up so much as well. So in order to meet that demand, we really need the density. In order to do the density, we obviously need the sewer and water. So it is, I think, a problem that there's no magic wand, but improving the awareness and starting to see more investment at the municipal level is really the first steps needed.
Thank you. And Sarah, so let's go over to you then with some of these questions about resources that reference the excellent report that just came out from New Hampshire Housing, and we can make that link available. In addition, there is at the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox. To Sarah and Heather, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I am by no means an expert in septic or wastewater system alternatives, but I did want to put a plug in for the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox because there are so many questions about sort of innovative approaches, and there is a section in the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox on wastewater system alternatives. So that's a link that we can send out to attendees after this. If you're not already familiar with that tool, there's a lot of really great information in there. And Heather, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I was going to sort of step back a bit to talk about the issue of infrastructure in general. We had, oh no, my mind just went blank. I was going to talk about the Housing Champions program. In fact, we had $3.5 million that we awarded to communities that wanted to increase their infrastructure. I think it's important for communities to sort of have like a wish list, whether that's in their CIP or their master plan, plan for what investments they want and they need, and then try to find that money, whether it's a state program or some other type of federal program. There's not a lot of money for infrastructure. I've sort of looked out there. So I think as a state, if we're going to support anything with funding, supporting infrastructure would be one of the most important areas to funnel that money towards, because there are communities out there that do want to build more density, that do want to extend, they do want those dollars. And it's true, there's just not a whole lot of it out there. The other question is, how do you extend your infrastructure? If you don't have any, well, that's a pretty big one. You're just going to have to, find some funds to invest in it, and that's going to be significant. But some communities, for instance, Concord has an urban growth boundary, and if you are within that urban growth boundary and you want to build new, you have to pay for the cost of the water sewer to extend it. So I'm not going to comment on whether that's a good or a bad policy, but that's what they have in their zoning and in their regulations. So they do look to the developer to absorb some of that cost, as Preston knows, to extend the water and sewer. So sometimes that's not always feasible, or maybe doesn't make sense based on whatever the project is. And then the only thing you can really do is go seek a variance and say, this doesn't really make sense for me, I just want to make improvements. But there are multiple ways that communities use to extend water and sewer infrastructure. And I don't know a whole lot personally about the alternatives to sewer, but I know that's more of a conversation really with DES and what will they allow. And so I think that would be a really great presentation, a really great webinar to say what are the alternatives to sewer and what is the capacity that DES will allow. I was surprised to see they have kind of a flexible interpretation of how much is needed for septic. So in some situations, you might only need 20,000 feet for a septic, 20,000 square feet for a septic system. In other situations, based on the soil and all that stuff, you need close to an acre. So like Nick brought up, having a science-based approach to lot size, I think is really helpful, especially for communities that do want more housing. 3/4 acre lots, 3/4 of an acre for a single family home, in many cases is going to be sufficient according to DES. So.
Yeah, so Nick, let's go over to you, because there are a number of comments in both Q&A and the chat about the narrative here. And as someone who is advocating regularly prior to Housing Action New Hampshire, when you were the executive director of the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast, you were working with a lot of municipalities at the municipal level looking for solutions, and now at the statewide level. I mean, what are you finding will resonate with people who want to problem solve, but also feel like they need to preserve the community that they love?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's a lot of the push and pull we're seeing at the state level and the local level, as you mentioned. I mean, as you're hearing from all the panelists here, these are complicated issues, and the wastewater and infrastructure is expensive and it's difficult, and you have a lot of folks who are trying their best to make smart decisions, but know that they want to keep their communities and protect their taxpayers and make sure that this is something that is not going to be burdensome for folks, especially, we know folks are, especially seniors on fixed incomes, who can't afford to have these big property tax increases, right? And so they want to understand the full implications of that. And that's why I think, what Heather had brought up, and what so many people have talked about where does your town actually sort of generate positive revenue from? And that is oftentimes your urban core, or even if it's not an urban area, but your downtown area where there is more density, because our property tax system looks at the structures on the land, and so it's how has that property been improved upon, and that is the assessed value, and that's where revenue is generated from. And so when you think about these projects, trying to figure out how do we make the upfront costs work, because we know longer term that will start to pay for itself, right? And that will increase the tax base, that will allow to incorporate some of the rising costs, that we see all over the place, whether it's, staff costs or other infrastructure costs. And so, trying to have these data points out there and know that there are a lot of other folks who are dealing with the same problems, I think is incredibly important. And we have just seen such a more, I think, willingness. And one of the things that I'm optimistic about is that there are so many folks who do see the benefit of where we need to go and want to be part of this solution. And so when we have good data, when we have some of these other resources, we can start to tackle the tougher problems in a way that protects taxpayers, that leads to more growth, and will increase affordability and help our businesses and our local economy. So I think there's a lot that we could do going forward. I think a lot of folks are coming at this from a really collaborative standpoint, and this is, just the start of that.
Great. Rick, I want to ask you about in your demo, you showed everyone, how to get into the atlas and start to capture the maps that they want to tell them their story. We do have a question here about when some town sewer systems share water sewer, like a sewage treatment plant from Hudson to Nashua. I mean, how much detail are we getting into with the pictures that we're providing, and what do we need to make sure that utilizers of the atlas know the kind of follow-up that they'll need to do?
Sure. So the data we're showing is strictly where the water and sewer is. So it's, we're not making any, assertions that you can actually connect to the water and sewer just because the lines are there. So that would definitely require follow-up. But hopefully the value is knowing where they are, so at least you can start those conversations, with, the officials that you need to talk to. And, the areas that we're showing as having water and sewer, it's basically it's a 300, what you're seeing on the maps is a 300-foot buffer from the lines. So that's the approximate area of the water or sewer line. And then for our zoning, we're saying, parcels that are within that 300 feet, we're saying are potentially have access to water and sewer out to about a quarter mile from the line. But again, it's a estimate of the areas that in theory have availability of water and sewer, but it does not, it would be nearly impossible to determine the capacity of all these systems and the regulations of each, individual system. So it's hopefully a first step for developers or other people to see where the water and sewer is and then start to make those further inquiries.
So as we get towards the end of this webinar that's gone so quickly, I want to ask about all these other potential opportunities that these new maps open up for us. So we've touched on conservation, we've touched on infrastructure development. There's even trying to understand where what are commercial zones, what they can help us understand about what's available there in terms of business growth, childcare, for example. I just would like to open it up to the panel to say, what conversations do you want to see New Hampshire leaders having now that we have this data all in one place? And please, anyone, please go ahead and take the floor.
Well, from my perspective, I think, one of the questions really hit the nail on the head. Where does the money come from? Okay. We know we need this to grow, to continue to be a strong and vibrant state. So, what more can the state do from a leadership perspective to help identify or advocate for federal funds so the municipalities can take advantage of those? I was recently speaking with a former economic development director who noted, there are federal funds out there. There have been federal funds out there, and sometimes they require matches to some level at the state level or at the municipal level. So, more focus on making sure New Hampshire is getting our piece of the federal funding that is available, I think would be a great first step.
Great. Well, given the time, I'm going to turn it back to Ernesto and just I want to thank our panelists and presenters today. I want to thank the attendees for joining us. I want to thank New Hampshire Housing and New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. And I want to thank the college and the colleagues here, as well as our student researchers, Ben Mazer, Natalie Denon, Tom Donovan, and Sam Quinn, who worked incredibly hard this summer to make this water sewer data layer a reality. Ernesto?
Thank you, Alyssa, and everyone who presented today. You're right, that hour went by very quickly. I am just going to share our closing screen here. And thank also our audience for your time and attention this morning. Imagine you found this discussion as fascinating as I did, and wish you all a great rest of the day, and to you all, a great rest of the day. Thank you so much. I'm Ernesto Burden for New Hampshire Business Review, and have a great rest of the day.